Hello, everybody, and welcome to the WhatCulture Horror Podcast, hosted by me, Ash Millman, and joined by he, Josh Brown.
Hello, Ash.
And also by he, Ben Roy Turner this week. So hello, Ben Roy.
Boo!
Oh, very scary indeed. Right, so this week we have a lovely podcast lined up for you today because, you know, we're all big fans of Resident Evil. We're all big fans of action horror movies. We're all big fans of the weird and wonderful, big, fighty gun horror movies that are out there. So we figured that we'd give a little shout out to those this week and kind of dissect the genre, how it comes together, and whether it works or not for the most part, because I feel like there's a lot of action horror movies out there that kind of stumble at the hurdle of being an action horror movie. But we're going to talk about the best ones, we're going to talk about the ones that don't really work, and we're going to kind of dive into a case study as it goes on with lovely Resident Evil. So lock and load, guys, because we're going to jump right in. I'm going to ask you what you would define an action horror movie as, because it's very easy to say, oh, action horror movie for this whole thing. But what do you think are the actual, like, encapsulating points of an action horror movie?
It's so nebulous, isn't it? Because you want to just say, well, Ash, it's an action movie with horror elements. It's a bit more specific than that. But for me, when it comes to like action horror, I think of the late 90s and early 2000s in particular. You know, when we had very much what was in pop culture was kind of more gothic or darker or slightly edgier. So you had kind of, you know, superhero movies that were based on horror concepts like vampires and stuff. You had big lovish blockbusters where you had werewolves fighting vampires, and it was essentially taking these traditional action frameworks and then just essentially injecting it with a whole load of horror iconography, horror monsters, horror kind of setups. But for me, the perfect kind of blend of the two is when you have something that can stand alone as both. You know, I don't think we're going to talk about it today, but when it comes to horror comedy, for me, the best example is Shaun of the Dead, because you can look at that and you can watch it as a straight horror movie. You're scared, it has like thrills, but it's also very funny. It's something for me that doesn't sacrifice either part to put the other one over. So it's not just an action movie that happens to have a sprinkling of horror on top. It's something that works. If you are only there for the horror, you will get enough out of it to enjoy it as a horror movie. If you're only there for the action, you will get enough out of the action to enjoy it just on that term as well. So there's no kind of compromise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Ben Roy? What would you say makes your action horror genre complete?
Well, for me, you need a lot of things to shoot. I think it's less about you need a lot of like monsters or some sort of foe to take down, but they're not really a big of a threat because they're always held back by unlimited bullets that everyone seems to have. And they also, for me, aren't the main focus. Like, we're not going to go so deep into this one. So like Dog Soldiers is a werewolf film, right? But it's normally all focused on the soldiers in the house, holding them off, shouting, "Come and have a go, you think you're hard enough," or shooting something out the window. You never really see any of them until towards the end. Or like, say, trying to think of another, it's mainly just people mowing down hordes of things that if they get to you, they're going to ruin you. But for the most part, we keep them away from them. Away, and we are discovering some sort of normally a mystery behind it for me.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, right. I think I tried to have a look at this, tried to find like the official definition of action horror, and all I got was, oh, it's horror movies with action in, or oh, it's action movies with horror in, like exactly what you'd expect from it. And I feel like to come down on kind of the specifics of action and horror obviously is something that elicits fright, and then action has all those multiple meanings where it's like just something happens, something thrilling or exciting happens, or you take it the other way where it's like someone can die in action, like where it's to do with war. And I think this warring kind of element is what ties into these films, whether it's like them trying to get away across the city and fight their way through, or if they have a big central foe that they're trying to take down. I think that kind of encapsulates most action horror, if not all. But yeah, it's interesting to talk about what it really means, because all horror movies have action sequences in them, as there's usually something that needs taking down or some sort of a natural evil that needs fighting against or facing up to. Even paranormal, supernatural ones will have action in the form of like death sequences and stuff. So it's interesting to have it as a particular category. But I think you're right, Josh, in that it's very much, you can't sacrifice either one. It's still very scary, but you're still going and getting a lot of thrilling experiences on the whole thing as well. My next question to lead on from that and kind of dive into action horror and why it is so hard to get right, because that's kind of the angle we're going to go with. Do you like action horror movies as a whole? If someone said, oh, what's your favorite subgenre? Would it be action horror movies? And if not, why? And if so, why? Well, tell me about action horror movies and your feelings towards them.
I think we talk a lot on this bloody podcast about accessibility when it comes to horror, and I think action horror especially is something you can just kind of turn on and have a lot of fun with. But I think you are right in that it takes a lot of effort to, again, thread that line and make an action movie that's also horrific. And I think it's partly down to what Ben Roy was talking about there, where unlike, I would say, a conventional straight horror where you usually have, one or maybe two kind of predators going after a prey, and like essentially the prey outnumber the predators, but they still get off, and those power dynamics are inverted, like you were mentioning there. When it comes to action horror, it's almost like you're plonked into the middle of a war. You're fighting these monsters or creatures that individually are scary, but don't necessarily work as an individual. They work as a collective. So you're always fighting wave after wave of vampires, a wave after wave of zombies, a wave after wave of aliens, and something like that. And the horror is kind of more from the overwhelming amount of something rather than the individual kind of, I don't know, creepy factor of whatever the thing is. But because of that, I think a lot of directors can kind of fall into a trap of, because they're only scary because of the sheer numbers, kind of forgetting how to make the threat kind of stand out, if that makes sense. Make it feel like your characters are actually in danger, because if you make your central figures too powerful, it becomes boring that you're just watching these dudes blow away other dudes. And it's like, well, I could get this in any action film. This doesn't need to be action horror.
Yeah. Would you say they're kind of up there for you? Would you seek out action horror though?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like especially like the examples we're going to talk about today, because when you get it right, man, you get the best of both worlds, and they absolutely kick ass. You get something that is genuinely frightening and has this kind of rich atmosphere, but at the same time, you get these kick-ass set pieces where someone might roundhouse kick a dog in the head. I don't know.
They might. Then maybe they will. Maybe they will later. But a roundhouse kick into dogs. Ben Roy, how about you with action horror movies? Where does it sit on like your level of I really love this, or yeah, they're fine, I'll watch them when they come round?
If anyone's ever seen my letterbox, you can see that action horror is a staple of the 2 a.m. one last watch. They're just perfect just to forget about the world and just have things go on at you. Maybe sometimes a bit of a jump, maybe some fun action set piece. But really, it's just something for me where I can just slowly seep into the couch and let the snoozes take me. I love action horror, and I always like the fact that they can always mix a few jokes in there, and I can, when I was younger and I watched films with friends, I don't know if you ever did this, you'd always like, okay, we're all gonna be, I'm gonna be that person in the film, you're more like that person, and we're all like egging them on to see who's gonna die, sort of thing. So I think it always stems from there for me, from a young age, where I was very, like a film we're going to talk about later, I was terribly scared of it. I could barely watch it. But the action pieces of horror got me into horror, and that's how I went into other things. Like, I don't know, I was watching a terrible film last night, not terrible, Creep, and I wouldn't have watched all that if I did first. Yeah, I watched both of them last night. I just did both of them.
Are we talking about the train one or the one with?
Oh no, the other one, the other ones.
The brilliant one. And you said terrible.
I said terrible as in like terribly like horror. Like I wouldn't be able to watch that as a kid. But like action horror gets me in there, and now I think horror is my most favorite genre of all of them.
Yeah.
So yes, I like them a lot.
There's definitely something for everyone with them. I think for me personally, very much, I like action horror and I really enjoy a well-made action horror. But for the most part, I feel like it's really hard to pull off the horror elements, because if someone can kill everything with a bunch of bullets, if you can face up to an enemy and just blow it up, and you're there with very well-prepared people who are like strapped to the nines, I don't know the words for it, but war words, where they're covered in ammunition and guns and everything, and can take anything down that is thrown at them, because that's part of the excitement of the film. You lose out on the horror element, so you need to balance the two really well for me personally. But that being said, I love schlock, I love self-aware cheese, and I don't think you get those quite anywhere else as perfectly than in action horror. So, with that in mind, what would you say are some of your like favorite aspects of action horror and favorite movies that kind of embody that? Because there are so many ones that do it so right, and there are so many ones which are defined as guilty pleasures. Action horror is the biggest one that gets slated critically, but fans stick by it and go, no, but we love this stupid, goofy film. So for you guys, what would kind of stand out as the ones that you go, no, this is brilliant, this is legit?
Blade 1. And I know a lot of people love Blade 2, right, from Guillermo del Toro. And I fully agree that those two movies are amazing. But for me, the first edges it a little bit more just because I think it has like a darker kind of... This sounds really stupid to say about a magical vampire movie, superhero movie, but it feels more grounded and it feels more kind of believable in that world. Like the horror elements kind of feel rooted in what horror and thriller movies were doing in the late 1990s. So you get this kind of industrial aesthetic that, for me personally, really, really works. And I think the imagery that you have in that movie is so kind of influential when it comes to the early horror movies of the late 90s and 2000s, where you've got like all of these vampires. Like I think of the opening sequence in the club, where you've got this rave with a bunch of vampires and the blood starts coming from the sprinklers. And it's a great set piece because you've got this one guy who's essentially being sacrificed to all of these vampires. And the moment you realize that you kind of, this dude's out of his depth, like it's such, for me, it's like one of the most memorable horror movie kind of images, like in my lifetime. I think it's so great. But then you get like the introduction of Blade in that sequence where the thing switches on a dime. So you get the jolt of the horror, conventional horror setup, but then it transforms into something far bigger and far more spectacular. And I think the way Blade kind of constantly does that throughout, and the way it kind of has its cake and eats it too. It has these horror setups, has these horrifying sequences that are genuinely scary. It has one of the best jump scares ever in about this vampire who's been set on fire, and he kind of jumps up off the operating table, and it's honestly terrifying. But then you have like a genuinely epic action hero in Wesley Snipes' Blade kind of countering in it. And I think that performance in particular, and the way that first movie is shot, kind of, it plays it so straight that it could almost be a parody, but the fact that it has no kind of winking goofiness, even though a lot of the stuff is goofy, helps kind of center the horror and make it feel weighty and make it feel believable. It's never kind of playing it off as a joke. And for as much as I love the second film, I think that is more of a superhero movie, you know, rightly so, because Blade is a Marvel superhero. But I just think for me, by going down a more superheroic route, it kind of like loses the edge that the first one had.
Yeah. How about you, Ben Roy? What are your like favorites, and do you like Blade as well?
I'm just going to undercut Brown and quickly move to my film. I'm more of a Blade Trinity kind of guy, you know, for certain reasons that we won't go into right now. But my film of choice has to be Dawn of the Dead, Zack Snyder's 2004 version of the Dawn of the Dead. Now, we had 28 Days Later where that made zombies fast, and that was kind of like, that spurred it on, kind of like gave the jolt back into the genre. But I feel like that film, Dawn of the Dead, 2004, was the catalyst for zombies just to go, along with Shaun of the Dead, just like, hell, let's have a new zombie film every week. I mean, that was obviously bad, but for me, just the opening where it totally like flips it on its head, where normally in a zombie film, you can close the door and be safe from one zombie. Nah, puts his head straight through the door. And, you know, show you got to run. And there's this great sequence where the main character, I can't remember her name. I think I never even know her name. Where she's driving away and her husband's chasing her down the street. And he just gets bored and just goes after someone else who's on the lawn trying to shoot another zombie. You see him scream and run away. And from there, the action set pieces just build and build. Cars flying everywhere and them trying to save people in a van, and there's just some woman in a wheelbarrow, and they think, oh, this woman in the wheelbarrow is going to be fine. She isn't going to get up and run at me like she does in the film at that point. It does have some ridiculous points where there's this one girl who sacrifices everyone just for a dog, and that ends up ruining the whole sort of like setup in the mall. But for the most part, it takes zombies and just gives them, for me, just gave them new life, and it had me so excited because you always think in a zombie film or anything like that, I could just walk a bit faster, but here they are just pummeling at people, and the close-up shots of Ving Rhames with a shotgun always gonna love it. And Doug Stamper, but with hair in this one, great stuff.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said for action horror, like heavily having its pillars in zombie horror, especially in like recent years with stuff like World War Z, even way back when with Army of Darkness, Train to Busan, things that have massive set pieces of, oh, here is an unrelenting wave of horror that will get you if you don't headshot it very specifically, and that the normal person couldn't cope with, and you need big military interference to deal with. I think zombie movies lend themselves so well to action horror that a lot of those can do it much better than your average, like your vampire, your werewolf, etc.
Well, I want to ask you guys, right, because I've just literally clicked something there. I'm pretty sure that we all have a fondness for 28 Weeks Later in this podcast so far.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking right then, because I think 28 Days Later is the better movie. It's the scary movie. It's got more things going on. But I've watched 28 Weeks Later way more times, you know what I mean? Because I can just put that thing on, have a good time, and kind of like have a laugh, get a bit scared, enjoy myself, because I feel like even though they're both about like, you know, fast, rage-infected monsters, I feel like the second one kind of is closer to what we would class as a kind of conventional action horror piece. I don't know if you guys would agree or have the same experience.
No, I don't think any opening sequence in a film for me, action-wise, is ever going to beat the opening of 28 Weeks Later with Don abandoning his wife because she's trying to help some random boy and him just sprinting down that field. I remember seeing that. Like I snuck into the cinema to see this film. I wasn't 18, and I was like, I paid for, I think it was SpongeBob the movie to get into this. But that tangent aside, I think, like you, Brown, I've watched this film so many more times than 28 Days Later, even though Days is the better film. But for this, it really does encapsulate like running zombies, let's shoot them and let's just go. And then they keep bringing back the In a House in a Heartbeat, but more amped up and just gets you into the sequences every time. And it's more inventive of how it treats the zombies. Like you have some in the underground, you have the gas, and then you have the beginning bit, and then you also have when everyone gets infected in Canary Wharf. There's enough schlocky zombie action to hold that film together.
Yeah, I think 28 Weeks Later, I feel like for action horror, when it does get it right, when it does like nail things down, it's because even when the horror's gone, you've got the action sequences that carry it forward because they're so entertaining. So like even if it doesn't scare you anymore, you can go back. A horror movie that is all about fear and all about eliciting that fear response, you can only get a certain amount of watches out of it because you're never going to be truly terrified for the most part in the same way that you were when you first watched it. Whereas an action horror movie, even when the scares wear away, you've still got big set pieces like the opening of 28 Weeks Later, which is legendary, like your man giving your infected woman a snog and turning into a nasty zombie, even though it's really dumb and stupid, breaking into a quarantine area. Like and it capitalizes on being able to kind of revel in those moments. But this is where we kind of got to circle back around and ask why action horror is so hard to get right, because you've got stuff like 28 Weeks Later, you've got stuff like Aliens, obviously we love Aliens, Chef's Kiss, you've got stuff like Upgrade, which is the best in recent years action horror movie put to cinema. It is incredible. If you haven't seen Upgrade, go and watch that. It's all about a man who has a little implant and does some crazy things with his arms that he just isn't in control of, and has just wonderful cinematography. Also
gruesome as hell.
Yes, it's perfect. But you have films like that like obviously get that, oh my God, I love this film response. But there are so many more that are like, oh really? Do you like that? Like Doom. I love Doom.
Yes.
People don't back Doom. And
Doom's a really good fun movie.
It's very dumb fun. But this is the thing of where we've kind of got to question why action horror is so hard to get right. Is it because people don't want to let go and embrace the schlocky cheese and these formulas that are set out in place? Or is it because it's doing something inherently wrong by sticking to the formulas? And we can kind of circle this back around to Resident Evil, because that's where the bulk of this conversation is going to go. As we all like Resident Evil. I watched it last night. Ben Roy is the biggest fan in the universe. And Josh is
It's all right.
As well. So we've got loads of Resident Evil chat to do, because I feel like that's a really interesting one that toes the line of people loving or hating as well. People who like give it time or go no. So yes, I'm going to open the floor after that big old ramble and basically say why are these things so hard to nail down for a massive audience when they should be so right? When you have the Aliens, when you have the Upgrades, when you have the ones that have laid it out for them, why is it still that they don't land the same?
For me, right, like I think Resident Evil is the perfect case study, and I think Doom is also the best counterpoint, because I feel like they're very similar movies in terms
They're the same movie.
Yeah, exactly. They're more or less the same movie in terms of structure and kind of tone in what happens. There's a lot of build up to this kind of action payoff. But for me, when it comes to Doom, it's just too boring because it doesn't get either element right. For me, the horror elements in Doom just do not land at all. Like that build up, and it is a lengthy build up, just never really amounts to anything. I don't think the monsters are particularly scary. I don't think the scenes are well set up. I think the characters are mostly unlikable. Then when we get to the action, yeah, we get that awesome fight between The Rock and Carl Urban at the end, and we get the awesome first-person thing, but there's not enough of it. Whereas when it comes to Resident Evil, I think the build-up is kind of, it has more to it. You have the mystery of Milla Jovovich's Alice kind of like waking up with amnesia, which is completely daft and cheesy, but it works. And then you're immediately swept into this underground lab that, like, when I was watching it again the other week, like, I couldn't believe how little time it wastes. Any of the Resident Evil movies, they just get into it straight away. And yes, there is kind of a build up after that, but it gives you enough of the world, I think, to kind of chew on. And even though it's daft, even though it's about all of these silly viruses, even though it's about all of these conspiracies, I think there's enough there and enough technical craft to it that I think it carries it and it makes the build up kind of as interesting as the payoff. And I think that's what a lot of action horror movies get wrong, is that you're just waiting for something to happen. You're waiting for something to begin or waiting for this payoff to be justified. And in a conventional horror movie, that often comes in kind of like really good scares. But when the payoff is ultimately action, I think the action needs to be particularly good to justify such a long build-up.
Yeah. I think there's something to be said for these both being video game movies as well. Like Doom is a video game movie and Resident Evil is a video game movie. And they're taking iconography of very well-loved action horror games where you go around shooting loads of stuff in video games and trying to transpose that to a new medium, which is a whole different argument and problem in itself. And probably why lots of people don't resonate with it in the same way, because they want the game as a film. They don't want iconography shoehorned into a new narrative. But if you look at Resident Evil purely from the film standpoint, which is what we're going to do, just kind of separate it out a bit, the beats that it hits are they're just really good, big, dumb fun for the most part. I think it does get everything absolutely right. It has set pieces. It's a bunch of set pieces strung together that lead in. They get bigger and bigger and bigger as you go. Like you've got the first bit where everyone's killed off by the virus leak, and then it gets a little bit bigger. You see a bit more of the facility. You go downstairs, zombies start waking up, then the liquor breaks free, and then you get the awesome dog sequence, and it just keeps going and going and going and showing, oh god, this is bad, oh it's got a bit worse, oh no, it's really really bad, until it culminates in big liquor showdown on the train. And I think that's kind of what things need to do, not have your best sequence in the middle, but save it up and give a bit more each time as you go along. Whereas Doom, as much as I love Doom, it is very sparing with its chunks of narrative.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this is a movie that kind of kicks off with that initial kind of panic in the hive when everyone's kind of freaking out and the Red Queen's killing everyone. And then one of the major set pieces after the build-up of introducing the team is that bloody laser wall coming out and offing about 3 of the characters. And like you said, it doesn't save, I think, its best moments for last. It always peppers them throughout, so you're not waiting for that build-up and you're not wondering whether it's going to be justified, because you're getting regular intervals that are made of these great set pieces.
Yeah.
Everyone remembers that laser wall, and that just straight up wasn't Resident Evil, but it became so iconic. It made its way into the games, like in 2 of them. It was that big. The thing with Doom is it tries to be so scary at the beginning, it just doesn't. But whereas I think for the first watch, especially when you're a horror sort of like scaredy cat like I used to be, I couldn't make it through this film. Like when the zombies came out in the feeding area, I was done. I just had to. That man when he gets pulled into the door and they're all eating, it was like, "Don't leave me!" And you can see the zombies are blatantly not biting, and just like people go, rah, 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 like, yeah. That was genuinely terrifying. But also, Resident Evil doesn't use bits again. Like it goes, laser wall, we're going to kill the legendary Colin Salmon, he's gone, don't have the laser wall again. Then we go to zombies are used for a bit, and then they're shifted aside, they're gone, and then we have the liquor and then all those problems. So it's almost like a sort of a 3-act series of pain with a bit of the middle bit. Like zombies are only in this film for a brief bit. Like I think someone did the countdown is like 14 minutes, something stupid like that, maybe 20 out of an hour and a half, 40-minute film.
I think Sorry,
I was just saying, and it really uses them well. It makes them effective, and it's not just like we all. I say we all think we could just pop them in the head, but even then, it makes it so they have to keep running, and they're always pursued until they sort of like get to the next level, like a game.
I think, I think you're exactly spot on. Like when I've been watching them all like back to back recently, and the biggest kind of difference between the first one and the second one, which had a different director, is that the second one is just it's full on zombie action, which sounds good, but it becomes monotonous and it becomes a bit boring, and then the zombies lose their kind of like scares almost. They don't become threatening in the same way, and you don't have that diversity when it comes to the set pieces that the first one absolutely has. And I remember, like, going back to watch it again recently, I was surprised about how little zombie action is actually in there. Because you get a burst of it, then you get another burst of it, but it's always kind of supplemented by these additive, more imaginative set pieces that it means every single time the zombies do show back up, they retain the threat that they had before, and you don't kind of stop worrying about them, even though they're not on the screen.
Yeah, I think with zombie movies, again, being like a pillar of action horror, the other one that's propping up this genre with all the stuff filling it in between being variants of it is monster movies as a whole. So like stuff like Godzilla and Cloverfield, where it's big action, like on a massive, massive scale, but then giving tiny bits as well. And I think if you look at a monster movie and put that into your action horror on a smaller scale, that is where it can kind of shine as well. So having the liquor as your central, oh my God, what the hell is this? There's going to be a big showdown with that, but then still having the laser ball, still having the army of zombies, still having other bits that kind of fill it out in between that are like, oh, okay, we're building, but there's still nice bits that come up. Like Cloverfield is one of my favorites for that, with having the stuff like underground where like the little monsters come out and then, oh, there's a big monster, oh, someone's head's exploded, oh, what's going on? We're going to climb up a very tall building that's swaying in the wind, that's definitely broken. And I think Resident Evil kind of is the prototype for that kind of horror, where it's like, okay, yeah, we're just going to have big dumb fun, and there is a story here, but it's as convoluted and silly as you're going to get in any sort of movie, because it doesn't matter, because you're here to be entertained by big set pieces. And I feel like that's kind of the point of action horror being hard to get right, because it depends on where their priorities lie. If they're trying to tell a brilliant story, that gets sacrificed by what needs to be done with set pieces. But if they're trying to make big set pieces, then they've still got to link them together with a story that's interesting enough for it to be propelled forward. But yeah, Resident Evil still, I think it walks the line well enough personally, but there's lots of people that would disagree.
I think that intro also makes it feel big. I don't know what it is about the screen zooming in as you have just after the voiceover. It makes it all feel important. And before you're lured into like the action set pieces where everyone's like smashing through the windows for some reason. But just something about every part of that film just lures me in. I don't know why. I can't wait for you to watch the rest of them, Ash. I can't wait for you to get through them all.
This is the thing. I think this is also an interesting point for action horror, because I thought I'd seen all the Resident Evil movies. I have memories of all the Resident Evil movies. I have not seen them all. I watched the first one last night thinking I'd seen it. I was like, wait, I haven't seen this. I've just seen every other movie with the same formula before. And I was thinking of Underworld is like what I was like, oh yeah, I've definitely seen all of the Resident Evil movies. No, I was thinking of Underworld. And I think that's interesting that they kind of do all have to follow the same rule book and go by the same notes. And it's only the ones that do it really, really well and don't try and subvert your expectations with something off the walls narratively or whatever, like that they can have a big twist, they can have their big moments, but they don't try and do anything completely different with the genre. It's the ones that dig into it that do it the best. Like again, Aliens, Upgrade, Underworld, Resident Evil, they all have the same beats and all do it to degrees of success because of that. It's like a manual is written for them. So that is my thought on that.
Yeah, I think there's an inherent goofiness to Resident Evil, obviously, like we've said, because of like the convoluted story, the ridiculousness of the situations. And it's funny that like when it came to that adaptation, we mentioned that it was based on a video game. They could have played the horror so straight. They didn't necessarily need the action elements. They didn't need the wider kind of like AI goofiness of it, because while like the original Resident Evil was certainly an action-based game, it was very much kind of sparing in its set pieces. Yeah, you had a big snake. Yeah, you had giant spiders and stuff, but you could have very much taken that source material and adapted it as a kind of straight horror movie. Which, to be fair, I would definitely love to see that take. But the fact that they did kind of filter it through this late 1990s, early 2000s action lens kind of transforms it into something completely different and yet kind of equally as entertaining. Like there's very little with the movie that connects it with the game, especially the first film, and yet I think you can still 100% enjoy it because of everything it adds. It almost knows what it is. In doing so, it knows that it's not necessarily a Resident Evil movie, if that makes sense.
And the film also starts off so clean before it gets so dirty, because you see everyone die and everyone falls down, and the woman who gets her head chopped off in the lift, but there's no blood anywhere. It's almost like, as a kid, I was thinking the zombies have just eaten all the things away and stuff like that. And it builds tension so well. I think this might be one of the most purest versions of action horror, because you get the bit where the zombie puts its hand up against the glass as well. And as we get, I love the AI. I love the Red Queen in this. I love the "you're all going to die down here," and that as well is just that was just before. Was that before or after the laser war? I can't remember now. I've seen it 100 times.
Just before, because she's like, "Oh, you're all going to die," and they're like, "No, I'm going to shut you off, lady," and then like go through the wall, and she turns back on. She does all sorts. She's messing with them loads, but I think it's just before the laser war.
And then we have fake reporter man who drops keys for a rake, and he's got his fingers out just this low, and somehow he manages to grab the keys, and it makes no sense while there's wet zombies trying to eat him. But it's just like, you just got to go over. Like, yeah, he got his hand through the grate somehow and got himself out. And you have some of the characters; they all sort of have a little bit of personality. Like the guy who goes, "You have to work for your next meal." That line always stuck with me. I was just like, no one's given up here, and even if someone's getting bitten, they still also have a bit of fight in them.
Yeah. I think you make a good point there, Ben. I think it's got like a lot of personality to it. I think that's kind of like key. Where Doom doesn't work for me is that you've got kind of like these actors I genuinely really like. You've got Dwayne Johnson, you've got Carl Urban. Yet their characters don't have much personalities. I only like them because it's Dwayne Johnson and it's Carl Urban, you know what I mean? I'm not there for the characters. And while the characters are, for the most part, incredibly one note in Resident Evil, I think the actors all bring enough to them, especially Michelle Rodriguez and Milla Jovovich. Like, they're two great presences that fill this movie, which has so many different affectations and so many different eccentricities and so much personality already that it can coast along on that, even if the CGI might not necessarily be so good with the lickers, or its story might be threadbare, or its characters might be lacking. There's enough charm to it that I think a lot of action horror sometimes loses.
Yeah, I think there's probably an inherent difference in action horror approaches, and the ones that do tend to get it right, or that are the more famous ones. It depends on whether you want to have it as a very realistic approach, or as, okay, this is going to be big, this is going to be silly, and you're going to have to suspend your disbelief and just get on board with this ludicrous world that we're creating. And I feel like Resident Evil bears no bones about just going, this is very dumb. Like, you wake up and Milla Jovovich is like knocked out with amnesia. All the crows, like a million crows outside, is even a sign this is not normal. That all freak out when she walks out. Then all these people come in. It's like, oh, big underground facility with this like strange CGI vision of where they are and heat mapping and stuff. It goes straight away. This isn't going to be realistic. This isn't a realistic world. We're going to put realistic kind of ish characters in this place and just kind of see what happens with all of these very unrealistic premises. And the ones that kind of fall on their ass a bit are the ones that go, this is really believable, and this is how all the logic plays out, and this is very logical because of X, Y, and Z. When really, it doesn't matter that much when it comes to action horror unless you've got it absolutely nailed down to the ground. Like Aliens, as much as that's a very realistic portrayal of character, it is not a realistic portrayal of world. Like, obviously they're on a random moon colony going, oh man, there's a million xenomorphs here and we're going to flamethrower all of them. Like the way that it sets things up, Blade. And this is why I think so many action horror movies are video games or comic books, because there's already a world set up that is so unbelievable compared to our own that they can kind of dive in and just have fun with it. And they've kind of got to live up to that when they are being an action horror movie, and too many go for the straight realistic approach. Is how can we make this as believable but as entertaining as possible, when I think they need to go the other way and go, how can we make this as big, dumb and stupid as possible, and just take a leaf out of like Pacific Rim's book and go big or go home.
What it is, it's the KISS rule. It's the keep it simple, stupid. Like with Resident Evil, it's just people go down to a lab that they don't know about. Then, oh no, they need to get out of the lab. That's the whole story. That's the whole story of that film. And what with aliens, Marines go to investigate somewhere. Oh no, there's aliens. We gotta go. Like it's pretty much investigate. Oh no, run away. That's the formula for this sort of thing.
Yeah,
I think as long as you, sorry, Ash.
Oh, I just more examples like Train to Busan. Oh, I'm on a train. Oh, I've got to get off. Army of Darkness. Oh, I'm in the past. Oh, I've got to get back. The Hunt. Oh, I'm being hunted. Oh, I've got to stop being hunted. Oh, I'm like that. That is definitely it. It's like, oh, set up the big scary moment and go, wow, that's bad. I think I better get out of here.
Yeah, I think as long as your characters give a crap about the world they're in, then you'll give a crap. It doesn't matter how silly it is. I think, like you said there, a lot of these kind of blends of action horror give too much of a crap about like the lore and assume that you are there for like the intricacies of the plot, whereas the plot is more or less just a kind of a conduit to have these ridiculous set pieces, and it doesn't necessarily matter whether you're invested in the mythology of the world or whatever. The only thing that necessarily matters is if the characters are invested in it. Like, you don't necessarily need to be interested by the world. You just need to believe that the characters are, so then you can feel for them when they're kind of coming up against these mad plot twists or these mad forks in the road or these horrific obstacles that will probably eat their faces off.
Yeah, like something like Tokyo Gore Police, where it's like, oh, okay, here's a load of crazy monsters I've got to face, and that's that. Like, just deal with that. And then that's the difference between something like a blockbuster with The Mummy that's like, oh, here's this whole world and lore that we're going to make an expansive universe of and dive into, whereas actually we all wanted to just see Tom Cruise fly a plane and crash it. Like, that's what you kind of sign up for if you see a Tom Cruise action horror film. Like that as in the most recent iteration of The Mummy anyway. That's what I think about it. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I mean, like the first two Mummy films are legendary in my heart. Like they'll always be there somewhere on. It'll always be a Sunday somewhere, and there'll always be The Mummy or The Mummy Returns on the TV at all times of day. You can just get in at any point and just enjoy it, because those films, they're spooky in bits, but really they're just like, let's get on a car while all these dead mummies are chasing us, or little monkey dead mummy things. Let's go.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? There's that brand of action horror which is adventure horror, and adventure horror is what we want to see a lot of. If you're gonna have action horror, you got to have your set pieces. If you're gonna have adventure horror, you got to have a bit of fun injected in it, where it becomes a comedy action horror instead, like Shaun of the Dead. I know I mentioned that earlier, but that is an action film as well, because it has big action set pieces in it, but it knows how to have fun with the world that it's in and kind of take the tropes and manipulate them into a funny adventure.
Yeah, 100%. Like, honestly, man, the Mummy and The Mummy Returns, like, I have such fondness for them, because I think there's something to be said about kind of like taking these other genres that we don't usually associate with horror and then just kind of injecting or peppering horror elements into it. I think there's a lot of fun in kind of seeing versions of these terrifying monsters or these iconic characters within these new contexts. And I think that's why the original Mummy works so well, because it's not just it has no pretensions about trying to be a full-on scary movie. Yes, there are some scary sequences, and yes, I was very terrified of Imhotep when I was a child, but like when we're talking about the best horror movies, The Mummy and The Mummy Returns aren't coming up. But when we talk about the best family adventure movies, they absolutely will come up, and it's because of the horror elements that make them more memorable. That's why we have that extra fondness for them, because they're taking this excellent framework and they're doing it really well. And then there's the additive enjoyment of, well, the main villain's this horrible mummy and he does horrible things. You've got these horrible scarabs that get under your skin, and that's absolutely terrifying. And also he sucks your skin off your face to revitalize himself. So
terrifying.
I think those are examples of, you know, the filmmakers just expertly peppering in the horror when they need to have that added effect.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely. So I like how I brought up the Tom Cruise Mummy as the bad example. We've all instantly gone, no, but the good Mummy, because that is the best like action horror out there. But yeah, I'm kind of have to just round it all up now to run out of time. So if you guys have any final thoughts on action horror, if you want to share those now, otherwise I'm going to do the round off.
They're good and silly. I don't know.
Yes.
I think that's all I've got. Watch Train to Busan. That's also really good. The Host is also excellent. We didn't get a chance to talk about that, but it's brilliant.
Train to Busan is brilliant, yes. Also, I think there's a common theme here where I think Colin Salmon's been in about 3 or 4 of them. So check out his filmography and watch his horror action films.
Yeah, gotta have the Colin Salmon plug. We love Colin Salmon, but yeah, mine would be, we only mentioned it like once, but watch Dog Soldiers, because it's like, oh, chef's kiss,
Yes.
big dumb fun, practical effect werewolves. So there you go. You've got plenty of recommendations for good action horror and why we think it is great. But you're welcome to disagree with us. You're welcome to tell us why you think action horror is so hard to get right in the comment section below. But yeah, please come back. We do horror podcasts every week. We want to talk to you about lovely horror stuff. Let us know what you want to see, and you can tag us on Twitter. You can find me at Ash Millman. You can find Josh at
Josh Brune with 2 O's.
And you can find Ben Roy
At Ben Roy Turner.
And we're also on Twitter at WCulture Horror, and you can hashtag us with WC Horror as well if you want to tell us anything about horror that you want us to talk about, you want us to discuss. But yes, action horror. Let us know what you think, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.
See ya.
Evil never dies.